All right, welcome everyone. And welcome back to the Voices of E-commerce. Today, I am honored to have Daniel Barber as my guest. I met Daniel when he was a student in international business and marketing at Eastern Michigan University, and where he graduated in 2009. He then went on to get his MBA at Doshisha University in Japan. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that.
No,
And
you're right. That was good.
I'm good. I'm good. All right. And then he started his career, and it's been quite an amazing career. Started as a management consultant in Nishida in 2009, becoming a senior manager in pipeline productivity at Responsys in 2013. By 2015, Daniel was a senior director of pipeline development and Tout app. And then he moved to Node.io, first as an advisory board and then as vice president. And 2017, Daniel became a senior vice president at DataGrail. Today, no more senior vice president role. He's now the CEO and co-founder of DataGrail, a privacy platform startup. And he also sits on a number of advisory boards of several tech startups such as Sign On Site, Reach Out, and Chorus. So welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you, John. Yeah, no, happy to spend some time today.
That's wonderful. So two things I would like to talk about with you today. The first is your career, which has been quite amazing. And then secondly, I would like to dig into a little bit what you're doing at DataGrail. But we'll start with your career. And so when I first met you, I thought it was amazing that you were from Australia, and it's a place I've always wanted to visit and never had the luck to get there. But you decided to come to the US to get your undergrad, and you went to Japan to get your MBA. How were those decisions? So you're very much international, but how did those decisions impact your ability to work with people throughout your career?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think for undergrad, I have sort of an unusual background. My mother, grew up in Australia. My father actually grew up in Michigan. So I'm sort of fortunate to have
Okay.
dual nationality from the get-go. And so I'd been to Michigan many times before visiting my family. And after finishing high school, it seemed like a logical next step to move to Michigan and
Mhm.
continue education there. But yeah, I did spend time in Europe as well. So I spent a couple years there through an exchange program. And then, the MBA in Japan, I'd actually lived in Japan in 1991 when my
Okay.
mother was teaching English there. And so I learned Japanese through high school. And so it was kind of a logical step as well. No mortgage, no kids. Seemed to be the right time. So I made the transition after undergrad to Japan. But I think in terms of how that's impacted my career, it has given me wider perspective on how to conduct business. And also, I think given a deeper understanding of different nationalities, ethnicities, which helps, especially when it comes to internet business or online business, because in reality, the world is flat at this point.
Mhm.
And so you're definitely seeing, different organizations working with folks beyond the national borders of what we live in within the US on a regular basis.
Very cool. And so, yeah, this is flat. I'm sorry, the world is flat comes from Thomas Friedman's book of the same name. So
Exactly. Yep.
read that.
Yep.
I think back in when I was at Eastern Michigan is about when I first heard
Yep.
about that. So, um,
Yep.
excellent. Now, I've noticed that many of the companies you worked at, well, actually, your undergrads in marketing, but have most of the companies have been in sales and marketing, and yet almost all of them look like tech companies. So, what's going on here? Can you explain how these two fields are merging and what that means for sales and marketing professionals?
Yeah, so that's an interesting observation. And I think one that I realized pretty quickly through my time at Ishida. So Ishida is a sort of leader in weighing and packaging and manufacturing equipment. $1 billion business, really an international brand. They have over 3,000 employees. But at the time, I could see there was an evolution happening in the company where things were moving to software, and so the leaders in that industry were really taking a forward look at what type of software they would need to provide their customer and using that as a competitive advantage. And I think you see that across many different industries now, where traditional industries that have acted very, sort of offline or without the use of technology are moving very quickly to, a technology-first approach. I think our period right now through COVID has sort of accelerated that digital transformation, right? So,
Yeah.
the days of going into the office. I mean, I'm taking this call from home today because in California we're in lockdown, so none of the employees at DataGrail are going into the office. So that has accelerated this digital transformation. So whether people wanted to accept it or not, every business now runs on technology. Coincidentally, Data actually tracks 40 million websites. So I got a pretty good insight into 40 million websites and what types of technology those companies would use. But you can see anything from, a hotel chain to a retailer, a brick and mortar retailer, using more technology to drive their business. And successful businesses have really figured out how to turn that into competitive advantage.
Yeah. And so for young salespeople or marketing professionals, what should they be looking for? Or is this something where they just need to focus more on, studying the technology? Should they all get MIS degrees, or what should they do? I mean,
Yeah. I would advocate as such. I think understanding the technologies that companies use that drive revenue is really important. I think it's very easy to to get distracted in other paths, but I think ultimately, if you look at just businesses during this period, right? So, one example I would look at would be Nordstrom. So Nordstrom have continuously a year-on-year increased their revenue from their online sales 5% every year. So if you go to their 10K annual report, you'll see that roughly 30% of their revenue today comes from their online business.
Right.
If you were to look at Macy's as a comparison, they are less than 10%. So that sort of has some impact into the way their business operates in the environment we're in right now, and probably for the future.
Whoa.
And I think if I was a student, I would definitely be analyzing why is Nordstrom successful, and how can I get connected to that, sort of to your point.
Well, and wasn't one of those, was it Macy's that is filed for bankruptcy or closing a bunch of stores? I can't remember what I heard about that, but to your point,
So furloughed a bunch of stores, right? Because they don't have a strong enough online presence to command the position in the market like Nordstrom has.
Yeah, right. Yeah, good point. All right, well, so you've had a great career and obviously have done very well. What types of characteristics, habits, practices? What is it that you do that you think has helped you succeed in your career as well as it has? I mean, obviously somebody sees something in you. What do you think are the characteristics that people see in you that that you could say, hey, this is what people need to be doing?
So I promise this is not a plug. So if there are students listening, John did not ask me to say this, but the concept of like always be learning is something that I've instilled in both my own practice day to day, and all the employees that have either reported into me or now are in the company that I founded with my two co-founders. We issue 3 books when people join the company. So we have 3 books that as soon as they arrive into the company, they're issued with Measure What Matters, which is a book on OKRs.
Yes.
It's sort of the philosophy of objectives and key results and why those are so powerful into sort of developing regular routines. Another one is Why We Sleep, because funny enough, it's quite common in startups that people choose what they perceive to be productivity versus sleep, when they don't actually realize the relationship that those two things have. In that their productivity is significantly increased if they just get 8 hours of sleep. It's actually quite straightforward. So that's one book. And then another one is The Lean Startup, which is this concept of iterative and sort of continuous improvement towards, a better objective, which coincidentally aligns very similar to the concept of Kaizen, which is what the Japanese use, which is just continuous improvement.
Right.
So, underneath all that, you saw the last point there is sort of inherent as a tenant into everything I've done since, sort of my first early days as a professional, in this idea of just like continuously adapting and improving on whatever process, whatever system it was that was deployed, or whatever employee was hired, trying to improve on those practices day in and day out.
Okay.
And then having the ability to take feedback, because I think the other thing that's often overlooked is, people see feedback as a negative,
Mhm.
when actually it's a gift, right? So if someone is willing to spend 15 minutes with you or even 10 minutes to give you their perspective of what you could have done differently, not what you did badly, but what you could do differently,
Mhm.
that's an incredibly powerful tool, because you can use that and then tune whatever it is you're trying to do, to get better.
Right. Right. Nice. Um, all right. And all right. So so you have a startup now. Um,
Yeah.
what has been the hardest part of running a startup?
So you'd think, the simple things or complex things of, trying to find product market fit, or trying to um, raise money. These things are actually not as difficult as they seem, and I'm sure, that's a wide generalization, but at least in my experience, they weren't as difficult, and I think that's probably because I've had more business experience than
Mm.
anything else. But I think the underlying theme of hiring, I see as a strength of mine, but it is the most challenging thing you will
Mm.
do starting a company, especially if you have aspirations of becoming a $1 billion business, which we do.
Hmm.
We will end the year probably around 50 employees. What does that look like next year? Maybe 120, 130 employees.
Right.
That's big growth from 18 months ago. We were three.
Yeah.
But part of that is like actually finding the right talent and finding the right leaders to lead different functions is incredibly difficult. And it's also because it's compounded by people who have what I would call stage appropriate experience, meaning that the
Mm.
people that start the company and join with you that are scrappy and just want to work really hard and really just want to do things and get it done, right? Those are not necessarily the same profile of person that you want at a later stage in the organization, when things need to be buttoned up and there needs to be formal process in place because the business has to scale, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
So there's stage appropriateness of the hiring, meaning that you actually shift through the types of employees you have, whether you want that or not. And so that's something that's often overlooked, I think. And so I would say, like, number one thing I'm always thinking about is, do we have the right people on the team today?
Right.
And do we have a path to ensuring we have the right people on the team tomorrow? Because those are maybe two different things.
Yeah. Well, that would be and something you said made me wonder. What do you do with those scrappy new startup types after the business is at a place where they're value has perhaps decreased? Is there a way to put them into new segments of the business, or do you just say maybe it's best that you find a new startup where you can flourish? I mean, how do you handle that type of situation?
It's really hard. Some folks, obviously, you hope that you can find homes for them and you
Mhm.
try to work with them to keep them in the organization. But at times, yeah, maybe there is a better fit for them. It's ultimately about skill development. So,
Mhm.
if you think about sort of the model of someone who's an executive, most of their time is put into recruiting, right? And if it's not, then they're actually telling you the wrong thing, because there's a reason why you get to an executive position. You hire people to do the work that you're
Right.
probably not doing yourself, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, right.
if you see an executive doing very tactical work, something's wrong. That means that they didn't hire someone to do that work.
Mhm.
Um, but to answer your question directly, it becomes quite challenging. Sometimes, it is worth it to continue to invest in someone to motivate them and sort of upskill them to the organization of today and tomorrow. In other times, it is better actually to just say, look, you know,
Yeah,
perhaps you'd be better suited an organization that's earlier in its development because you would be able to deliver more value. So those are hard conversations and hard decisions that,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
as an executive, it's daily.
Right. Wow. I don't envy that. I mean, that does seem hard.
It is.
Yeah, all right. Well, and speaking of the startup, so let's talk a little bit more about DataGrail here, because so DataGrail, it seems to be born out of government regulations, especially on privacy. So tell me a little bit about what is DataGrail and how do these regulations, how did that help form what the company is today?
Yeah, so good question. So I'd say the why we exist sort of question, right? Which every business should be able to answer that question of why does the business exist? What problem is it solving? Before you go into the solution, you should be able to address that point first. And if you look at what a consumer, what you or what perhaps I would like to do, right? There's sort of two tenets that we expect: transparency and control. And so what I mean by that is we expect if we were to ask Facebook, hey, what type of information do you collect about me? That they would be able to share that
Right.
with us, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we were to ask WebEx, right, Cisco,
Mm-hmm.
from this recording, what information have you collected about me? Cisco should be able to provide that information. That's the transparency kind of construct. And then on the other side, you've got the control piece, which fundamentally is, well, I should be able to say to Cisco, I don't want you to collect that information, or I want you to delete that information. And those two things underpin all of the different privacy reforms that we've seen in the last 5 years. And so as consumers, if that's the expectation, that's great. The only problem is there's two things that are going counter to that expectation. One is if you think about on an axis, on average, businesses today, if they're using Okta, which is a single sign-on platform for people to log into the different applications they have, if someone has been using Okta for about 4 years, or a business, if they've been using it for 4 years, on average, they use 190 applications.
Yeah.
Which means that your data and my data is potentially in 190 places with maybe 50 different owners of those different applications,
Right.
which creates some problems.
That's crazy.
On the other axes, right? So on the other axes, you've got this legal reform. So the GDPR was a European sort of regulation that went forward in May of 2018. And then you now have California's regulation that went into enforcement 2 weeks ago. And they all kind of look different. So Gartner kind of said it best. Today, the world's population, 10% of the world's population have data protection. If we look at 2023, so only 2.5 years from now, that number goes to 65%. So if you've got increased regulation that is all kind of different, and then you've got 190 applications that an organization uses, and that number is growing, and you and I are saying to businesses, well, I would like to know what information you have about me, or I would like you to delete it, or I would like you to send it to a different company. That starts to become very, very, very challenging. So if you sort of combine those two tenets of transparency and control, that creates an enormous problem for businesses to solve.
Now, do you attempt to, it sounds like you're trying to meet the requirements of all of these regulations, but they are, you mentioned that they're also a bit different. So are you just going with kind of the, least common denominator, I guess is to be the right term, and how you manage all this data?
Yeah, so it's a good question. The little nuances that the regulation has, the customer, the business, right? Because our business model is selling to businesses.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the resources, the legal resources, or the technology resources to say, okay, we need to be able to figure out how we can comply with all of these different regulatory requirements. So there's almost a default need in using a service or a consultant or a technology
Right.
like DataGrail to actually make that work. And then simultaneously, at a certain point, they lose track of those 190 applications. So they actually have, the larger the organization gets, right? I'm sure at the university you're teaching at now, you would have no idea what all the different groups are using, right? It's just impossible.
Yeah.
It gets to a point you just can't keep track. And so the idea that you and I could then say to the university, hey, can you share the data you have about me? That's impossible. So they need an application to be able to do that because there's shadow IT problems, which is a big problem. And then the data just spans across different systems. So they need to be able to figure out those nuances and also figure out the shadow IT and what's involved in those systems in a programmatic way.
Right. Now, would you describe your company as kind of like middleware that sits in between a bunch of applications and consolidates? And I guess middleware is a slightly different concept, though, or maybe I'm not understanding it right. I don't know.
No, you're
Am
you're
I-
actually really close to it
Okay.
because so if you think about the traditional middleware description, right, it is exactly as you described. It sits in between two applications to understand what's between these two systems and make those systems actually interconnectable.
Yeah.
Common examples of that would be Informatica. They have an application that does that. MuleSoft is probably one of the largest. And MuleSoft were bought by Salesforce a couple of years ago for just on $6 billion. They were actually one of our earliest customers. So that concept of connecting applications is actually what we do. So we built integrations with all of the common applications that you could imagine so that we become essentially the infrastructure to manage their privacy program because they need some way of retrieving all of this information. But it should give some indication of the level of sophistication, the difficulty here, if a middleware provider like MuleSoft actually uses DataGrail for their privacy program.
Right. But,
So because that goes conflict to their existing use case, which is just to be simply a middleware application, versus we are a privacy application, but with a middleware kind of construct, meaning we have to connect to everything.
Yeah. Right. And so what is your strategic vision along these lines then? So your company, I mean, you've got a good description of what they are, but where do you want to be?
Yeah. So if we think about, is this a $1 billion business? Is this a business that touches every consumer? It does.
Yeah.
So if you think about every business on the planet has some form of personal information, right? An email address, a phone number. They have to conduct business. But that goes counter to that problem I described earlier of every consumer expects transparency and control. So where does this go 10 years from now? Every business needs to be able to provide their consumer transparency and control, but they cannot.
Right.
So we serve as the intermediary. So your description of middleware is actually spot on. If you think about how MasterCard, Visa, and Amex operate today, they operate as middleware merchant transaction platforms for you and I to be able to conduct business, right? Coincidentally, Amex Ventures invested in DataGrail.
Oh, wow. Nice. Very good. It's always good to have those investors.
Yeah, it is helpful. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your business model. So how do you guys make money? I mean, obviously you said you sell this to businesses. It's a middleware type platform. So tell a little bit more about that.
So we engage with businesses. We have a software as a service model, so it's a SaaS business.
Right.
So sort of subscription model, right, where people pay on an annual basis a fixed amount. That number can increase. It actually increases based on the number of humans, the number of unique records that a company will manage on individuals, right? So it's actually quite logical. So if you think about someone like Restoration Hardware, they would pay more than a small online restaurant chain, for example, because they have more personal information about more individuals. That includes, potential customers and employees and past customers. So all of their personal information combined in a unique state and a unique identity is how we charge. And so as they increase the number of unique identities that they have, they pay DataGrail more money on a subscription basis.
So it doesn't depend on the number of applications that you have to connect to. So they could have thousands potentially of applications. You're just like, we'll suck that up. We're just going to focus on the individuals that they have.
Correct. And the reason why we took that approach, and so pricing is very difficult. We may change our pricing model over time, but at this time, I think it's actually very logical. And the reason why we took that approach was because if we charged on every new system that they would need to integrate, we become a tax. And so as they buy new systems, they have to pay their DataGrail tax every time they change a system or switch a system, which inherently is prohibitive to adoption of our product, right? So we want the integrations to be seamless, because the more things that we are connected into, the less likely they are to actually churn from our product.
Gotcha. So yeah, focusing on the customer then would hopefully, because every customer should be bringing in a little bit of profit for them. And so that's
correct.
Just a little bit, you get just a little bit of piece of that. So
correct. That's exactly right.
Got it. All right. So let's dig in a little bit into your technology to make this happen. What's that infrastructure look like?
So we're hosted on AWS, which most companies are at this point. Pretty common sort of structure there. We're a Ruby on Rails application, which again, also quite common. And then sort of a React front end, right? So there's a mixture of folks on the team. There are some folks that are focused on, the back end technology. So making sure that between systems, databases that we need to manage, they are able to work with that infrastructure. And then on the front end side, those folks are mostly working in React to deploy the UI and the UX that every one of our customers use on an ongoing basis. But the AWS sort of infrastructure piece ensures that from a security standpoint, the way we're configured at rest, so when data is at rest, nothing is actually stored in our environment, it's stored in our customer's environment. So when we collect data from all of the different applications that our customers use, it's stored in their cloud environment, not ours.
Interesting. Okay. And so just to cover some of these jargons you use. So AWS is Amazon Web Services.
Correct. Yes. Sorry.
No, that's all right. React, is that a library, front-end library, or what is that?
Yeah. So front-end language and
Okay. And then Ruby on Rails is a server-side programming language. What's that?
Exactly.
Is that not Java? Was it? I forgot. Ruby on Rails came from.
You're gonna catch me. DHH is the sort of originator of Ruby on Rails.
Okay, I'm drawing a blank, but that's right. So, okay, cool. And so, how do you make sure this works seamlessly? Because you're touching so many different applications. How do you get that functional excellence? How do you ensure that it works every time perfectly?
It's really hard. What we're doing is not an easy thing to do because we actually touch the consumer, right? So we have front end parts of our product that actually touch the end consumer, right? So if you go to Restoration Hardware's privacy policy today, or Overstock.com's privacy policy, you'll find there are links in there that actually can allow you and provide you with transparency and control into how those companies use your information. But that's front end, that's for the consumer. So you can guarantee that, those two businesses care deeply about that experience. So we need to make sure that works every time seamlessly. But on the back end of things, the one advantage that we have is that with enterprise software, the likelihood of use on an ongoing 24-hour-a-day basis, people log into DataGrail not on a 24-hour basis, right? So we can maintain SLAs that are reasonable. But for enterprise software, there's usually a lower SLA than something for a consumer product, right? So if you were in gaming, for example, that have some of the highest SLAs possible, if your game goes down, gamers may never use your game again, right? So we have to sort of prioritize the areas of our product that require the highest level of quality control, which is anything that's consumer facing for our customer. And then areas that our users of our customer would use, those need to work, at a very high rate, but at a different rate than the front end application for the consumer of our customer.
Gotcha. Right. So that makes sense. And so do the customers, and you mentioned privacy policies, but can the customers go in and actually change their data, or do they have that capability that will get populated out, or is it just or delete it? I guess it depends. So be gone, but
exactly. So if you were to go to revolve.com, that's a consumer brand down in Southern California, you could go there and choose what type of information that Revolve has. You could say, I don't want you to have any of my information. You could also opt out of the sale of your information. that front end is all run by DataGrail, and then the customer, Revolve, would use the DataGrail application to remediate those respective applications that contain your personal information. So there's a lot of downstream work that is created from consumer touch points on the front. Where I do see this goes, though, so to answer your question earlier of like, where do we end up? We end up to a place where consumers can actually control every part of what information a company has, right? We're not there yet, but it is not too far of a stretch to say you as John could go to a website and you could see what type of information that company has about you and then choose how that information is shared and how it's used.
Now,
that's a reasonable expectation.
Do you see, and I don't know if this would even be feasible anytime in the near future, the possibility of giving the end customer more power in controlling their data and moving it to companies that they want to? So right now, obviously, the businesses are the ones who are paying you. So to give the customers this type of power and freedom, I don't know how you would structure such the business model in that regard. But as a end user, I would like to be able to say, I'm going to move from Facebook to some other social media, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever. But I want to pick which data to move and not have to go manually to all these different sites. Is that
so
you picked, at all going to be feasible or not? Or is that just way too far down the road?
No, it's actually not. So we're doing some of that today. So so I'll share a few points. One, you've tapped into something that is where this industry, where we are going as an organization, that is a path that we actually lead to.
Okay.
And so a couple data points to kind of back that point. One, we did a survey of 2,000 consumers earlier this year, and I was actually on NPR talking about this topic. 83% of the respondents said that they want to have control of the information that a business has about them. So they want exactly what you described, right? They want to be able to say, yep, I want this information here, and I want you to send all this over here, and I don't want you to have any of that. In fact, I want to delete this. So they actually want that. So 83% of US consumers said, yes, we want that. And in fact, we have customers actually doing that today. So we have customers that receive requests from a consumer. They are legally required to respond to these. And the consumer has said, I want you, XYZ company, to send my information, in fact, only some of it, to ABC company.
Okay.
So we have customers actually doing that already today in the platform.
Wow. All right.
But that is very, one, difficult to do, and two, not consumer ready yet. Meaning, I would say, as you described, the consumer is not aware that they can actually do that, because businesses are not going to make them aware that they can do that until they have confidence in the vehicle to actually make that happen. Right. So essentially, when more companies use DataGrail, what you described becomes a reality.
Right. Well, and so that kind of comes to the next question, which is, and to develop that kind of trust, because now if you become that platform, how do you instill that? I use the term in my textbook, ethical excellence. How do you instill that not just within your organization, but then communicate that with your customers?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic point, and it's built into the construct of our values as an organization. So one, our central first value is transparency. And so if you think about it, we provide transparency as a product, but we also as a company have to have a value of transparency because it's completely driven into the business, right? Gotcha. That then aligns to, for our customers, we have no desire to make any profit or revenue from any form of analytics or any information that they would pass through us, right? So in essence, we act as a privacy infrastructure platform. So we are not looking to monetize in any capacity any of that information. Rather, we just act as a gateway. So very similar to the Visa, MasterCard, Amex scenario, where those companies, to be clear, can make money off that information. We have no desire to do that. We would act as the similar gateway, but for the purpose of privacy.
Gotcha. Nice answer. All right. And then how do you make this easy for your clients to use?
Yeah. So part of very effective SaaS is you have to think about your time to value, right? So for perhaps your students that are also thinking about this, when you look at these online businesses and you look at the tools and things they could be using, you have to think about how can you deliver value for the business you're engaged with, because we're selling to businesses, as fast as possible. And this applies to consumer applications as well in many constructs, meaning if it takes a business 6 months to see value from your product, that's too slow.
Yeah.
Right? They need to see value, even if it's small incremental value, as fast as possible, because the faster they do, then the more likely they are to use it, and then you get more product feedback. So it's a cycle there, right? So if you can't get value for your customer, then you're just going to have a lot of trouble. All of our development is focused on how do we shorten the time to value when they buy, right? So after they sign their contract, we want to have the platform at just the minimal platform setup in minutes, right? Not hours, not weeks, and so on and so forth. And so a lot of that is built around this concept of like a no-code experience. So you'll see a lot of SaaS products striving to achieve no-code, which basically means that the business doesn't have to use their engineering resources to deploy your product, because that's an experience that is counterintuitive to time to value, right? Because you're asking them to deploy their resources for your product. So ideally, you focus on, absorbing that engineering lift, which is expensive, but the end result is a faster time to value for your customer.
Yeah, but how do you do that? I mean, you just said you're working with potentially hundreds of different applications, and some of them I don't know, I'm assuming they all have APIs, but then you have to have access to those APIs because there's probably a bunch you haven't even worked with before. Am I not right?
Yep.
Yeah, so
No, you're dead on right, and it initially was a critical mass problem, right? So you have basically a scenario where it's a long tail. If you think back to your stats sort of problems, right? Of you've got these set of technologies that you must have. So we just deployed like enormous engineering resources first, just to get to 50 applications, right? And then to get to 100 applications that basically we could connect to pretty seamlessly without engineering from our customer. And then, now it's 200. Now we're trying to get to 500 by the end of the year. Wow. If you look at someone like Okta, who've been doing this for 12 years, they are middleware for identity and access management, right? So for logging into your applications, they have 6,600 systems they connect to. Wow. So this task has been done before. So we are doing the trench digging. But the trench digging has been done before. So there are people that we can go to for learnings of how to think about that from a, what is the critical mass? How do we think about different segments within different industries of perhaps this group of companies all use similar technologies. So if we go after those, then that means that we don't have to develop a similar, different varieties of the same application, if that makes sense.
So what industries are you focusing on now?
E-commerce.
E-commerce, yeah, right. Gotcha. All right, let's see, next question. So you mentioned Okta a number of times, and I believe I read that they're an early investor in DataGrail. So describe more your relationship with them. How are you two working together, and what do you see as kind of the future of that relationship?
Yeah, so when I think about investors, there are sort of a few different flavors, right? You have your first folks. So we raised a 200K angel round, right? And these are friends and family, people that are, in my case, not family in any capacity, but people that are influential in the industry that could get us to the next stage, right? And so those are usually small checks, but then as you get larger, you start to go into institutional capital. So then you're talking about venture capital firms that have the ability to use money from their limited partners to make investments in your company. And so we took on, money, venture capital, in exchange for ownership in our company. And then you have different flavors of institutional capital, like strategic or corporate capital, which we took on through Okta Ventures and Amex Ventures. And if we think about the Okta relationship, there's sort of a few things that you look for in investments like that. For us, I was looking for someone that could be a 10x multiplier, right? So someone that, because of their discrete expertise in a buyer and a profile of company that is similar to ours or where we were aspiring to be, we can use that to our competitive advantage. Meaning that the buyer of perhaps Okta is perhaps similar to the buyer of DataGrail or involved in the process in some capacity. It's also the similar type of company. So the company that might use Okta has invested in security or invested in privacy. So therefore, as a default, is more likely to buy DataGrail. And so there are similar types of companies to that, over time we will involve and engage from a capital perspective because I see them as a multiplier to our business. And, they have understanding about topics that we just described, right? Where they have 6,600 applications that they've integrated with. We aspire to do the same. So it's very valuable to have them involved in the process because they will accelerate both our R&D, but also our go-to-market efforts.
All right. And it sounds like it's been working pretty well so far.
It definitely has. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and so here's an interesting one. Maybe it hasn't, I don't know, but has your thoughts about or your understanding of privacy changed since starting DataGrail? And if so, how?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say what's interesting, if I were to rewind to sitting in your classroom just over a decade ago, and you said to me, okay, you're going to start a privacy company, I would have said you were crazy. I've acquired significant knowledge of how applications are made, what type of information they store, how they're interconnected with other applications, different data products, how they're sold, how companies manage their data products, how they sell them, how they take them to market. And so my knowledge of privacy has been accelerated, but I understood the constructs because of the technology experience that I had. So to double click on that for a minute, what I would say is, 5 years ago when I was at Taudab, I was signing these things called data protection agreements, right? So these agreements are really an articulation of a company's position on data privacy. And I would review the agreement and do my best judgment of how I thought, as a company, we were, assigning rights, if you will. But they didn't really have teeth. There was not a lot of legislation at that point in time, and not a lot of enforcement. If we fast forward to 2019, 2020, fines and enforcement for the GDPR are accelerating at an accelerating pace. And the consumer is now far more aware of what you actually articulated 10 minutes ago, right? You said, well, I want to be able to tell Instagram that I don't want this information and then maybe send all my information to TikTok, but I don't want to send this information. They're just aware of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's meant that actually it goes back to the two things, transparency and control. And so while the environment's got more complex, it's actually got more simple. The consumer just wants those two things. So if we can figure out how to enact those two principles, then that becomes a very powerful story for both our business and for our customers.
Yeah. Okay. And it's interesting. I guess it was about 2019. Was it 2018? I think maybe it was 2018. ECU, where I'm working now, East Carolina University, we had to have a conversation about what a GDPR mean for our university because we have foreign exchange students. We take trips to Europe. So we had to be aware of those data requirements and how they apply to ECU. And I think a lot of businesses are going to have that same, even if they're primarily US, but you have one customer who's in Europe, you have
Correct.
to be able to deal with those issues. And I think to your point, I believe you said earlier, is that this is changing. I think a lot of states, countries are changing around the world and applying much more stringent privacy requirements. And in my opinion, for the best, but as long as they do it right. Uh, um, but yeah, they could go completely wrong too. So we won't go there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing you see in the US, right? So you see California leading the way with
Yeah.
the California Consumer Privacy Act, um, but it creates interesting dynamic for other states, right? So if you're a business and someone in Montana asks for their information,
Hmm.
do you allow and support them to do so, given the California Consumer Privacy Act doesn't extend to Montana?
Right, right.
What I can tell you is that our businesses, the customers that we work with, the companies we work with, most of them just support that request. And if you look at
Yep.
Microsoft, they came out, maybe 3 or 4 months ago now, stating that they would actually honor privacy requests all across the US
Hmm.
because it's just too difficult,
Right, right.
right?
It's just,
So CCPA is in effect creating a sort of standard for US businesses. But that means that things have accelerated a lot faster than probably US businesses expected.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, anything else you want to tell us about DataGrail?
No, I mean, this has been fun. Hopefully this is valuable for the students, and from an e-commerce perspective, I mean, privacy is sort of at the intersection of everything.
Yeah.
It's connected to storage, it's connected to communications, it's connected to marketing.
Right.
All areas require some foundational level of privacy. So yeah, hopefully this has been valuable for people, and
I'm sure it
if they
has.
want to get a hold of me, they certainly can.
I've loved it. I mean, it's been great. Well, wonderful. Thank you again, Daniel, for coming. This has been a great conversation, and we appreciate it. And I guess that will wrap us up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.